Hello, I'm Sakin, and this is a beginner's guide to competitive Custom Robo. Custom Robo is an isometric, projectile-based arena fighter released for the GameCube in 2004. Its full name is Custom Robo Battle Revolution, and it's the first Custom Robo game released outside of Japan and the fourth in the overall series. I've played Custom Robo for over 15 years and competitively for the past 5, and I want to distill my knowledge into this guide and have it stand as a comprehensive overview of all the information a brand new player would need to know. Custom Robo can look hectic at first glance, but the actual gameplay is fairly simple. Despite this, there's a lot of strategic depth that comes from the massive variety of parts, each with wildly different strengths and weaknesses. It's impossible to cover absolutely everything while keeping this digestible, but I'll try to give as much useful information as I can. The Custom Robo netplay community has played on various patched versions of the game since 2020 to buff the many weak parts, bring the strong parts in line, and add a variety of new content and quality of life changes. The current competitive patch is Project Hive 3, so the specifics of everything I show and discuss are for PH3. However, the fundamental information is applicable to any version of Custom Robo. Like I said, I want this to be useful for absolute beginners, so I'll be starting from the complete basics. Feel free to skip the first 1 or 2 sections if you played Custom Robo before. First, let's go over the types of parts and how to use them. Just so you know, we play in tag battle mode by default, but I'll start by showing things in 1v1 to keep it simple. There are 5 types of parts in Custom Robo: body or robo, gun, bomb, pod, and legs. Players will select one of each of the 5 parts to make their build, usually identified by the names of the body and gun. For example, this build is usually referred to as Buggy Shotgun. After selecting your build, press start to ready up and enter a battle. Before the battle begins, both players first launch their cubes from the Robo Cannon. In competitive play, player 1 must launch to anywhere along the left wall, and player 2 to the right wall. After a second, your Robo will exit its cube. This is your Robo. Use the control stick to move your Robo around. Movement is fully analog, so you can move in any direction and at various speeds. Press A on the ground to jump. Hold A longer to jump higher. Press A in the air to perform an air dash. Different Robo classes have different types of air dashes. Normal air dashes to cover horizontal space, continuous jumps for maneuvering and gaining height, and actionable sky dashes to attack and turn while moving. Your leg part influences aspects of your ground and air movement, but we'll talk more about that later. Press B to fire your gun. Different guns have different properties, but they're usually the most powerful and most important part of a build. All guns automatically aim directly at your opponent, but keep in mind that guns are usually laggy and are easy to punish if they whiff. Press R to fire your bomb. Bombs are powerful missile-like attacks. They're fast and strong in neutral, applying safe pressure and often granting follow-ups if they hit. If you hold R, a reticle appears that you can aim with your control stick, then release R to fire your bomb at the reticle. Note that your bomb can detonate mid-air if it collides with something in flight. Press L to fire your pod. Pods are auto-homing drones which move towards the opponent and explode when near enough. Pods are also extremely key for good neutral pressure, and different pods are better defensively or offensively. Hold the control stick while pressing L to fire a pod in that direction. Finally, press X while grounded to perform your Robo's charge attack. Charge attacks are extremely varied, but all deal high damage, instantly knock down the opponent, and offer a small period of invulnerability, which can make them strong options in disadvantage. Different charge attacks have different amounts of startup and end lag, but most are highly punishable if whiffed, so be careful about using them in neutral. That's it for basic controls, so let's go over the basic mechanics now. To no one's surprise, you win a match of Custom Robo by reducing your opponent's health to 0, or by having more health than your opponent when time runs out. All parts do different amounts of damage, and the damage is influenced by your opponent's defense. For example, Sniper does 90 damage to Rayo 1, but 72 damage to Metal Bear, and 117 damage to Peregrine. All Robos also take reduced damage while knocked down, 30% damage from guns and charges, and 50% from bombs and pods. Robos are knocked down after a certain amount of down is dealt to them. Down is kind of like a second health bar, only displayed by the 3 pips above a Robo's normal health bar. Each Robo has a certain amount of down they can take before getting knocked down, and each weapon deals a certain amount of down. For example, Rayo 1 has 1200 down, and Sniper deals 800 down, so Ray gets downed after taking 2 sniper shots. While the Robo is standing, it replenishes down over time. As I briefly mentioned earlier, all Robos are instantly knocked down when hit by a charge, regardless of how much down they have. Once you get knocked down, you can mash buttons or spin the control stick to get it faster. You can go absolutely nutso on your controller like I do, but casually tapping one button is pretty much just as good. After standing up from being downed, Robos enter Rebirth. In Rebirth, you're invulnerable from all attacks for 1.5 seconds, which provides an opportunity to reset neutral. New players are often tempted to attack as soon as they get Rebirth, but good players are careful to play around this option and will easily punish a whiff, so don't just mindlessly mash gun or charge. If a Robo is knocked down by a gun while firing its own gun, the downed Robo's gun rounds will disappear. This is called an overload, signified by this sound. It's difficult to intentionally go for an overload, but there are often situations where you're about to be hit by a gun while your opponent is low down. In these cases, overloading is usually the only way to escape damage. Now that we know what the buttons do and how the game works, let's talk about parts in a bit more detail. There are hundreds of parts in the game. I could go into great detail about each of them, but then we'd be here for hours, so to keep this concise, I'll just discuss stats for each part type with a few examples to help you understand how different parts work. First, let's discuss Robos. There are 13 Robo classes in the game, with widely varying properties. Within a class, there are normal, armor, and speed type Robos. The armor type Robo exchanges some movement ability for extra defense, and the speed type Robo has the opposite exchange. However, the differences between the three Robos within a class are generally pretty minor. Each class is primarily characterized by their unique movement and defensive stats. Shining Fighter is a generalist bruiser class with fairly fast movement but enough down to trade effectively against most classes. Aerial Beauty is a highly mobile but fragile class, capable of moving extremely precisely in the air with their continuous jumps and decently on the ground, by taking high damage and getting downed easily. Metal Grappler is the bulkiest class, out-trading the rest with its massive defense and down. It definitely has the weakest movement of all classes, but can still put on the hustle if needed with its long, fast dash. Little Raider is the opposite of Metal Grappler, extremely mobile with high run speed and 3 continuous jumps, but with the lowest defense and down of all classes. Strike Vanisher excels at rushdown and runaway thanks to its 3 fast stealth dashes. Stealth dash means its air dashes phase through opponents' gun rounds, which enables approaches and reversals that would be impossible for other classes. Trick Flyer has supremely flexible aerial movement, with incredibly high maneuverability on its base jump and 3 quick air dashes to enable precise repositioning. Lightning Sky is a unique class, being one of 2 with sky dashes that allow them to turn and fire their weapons while dashing. However, Lightning Skies have pitiful defense and high landing lag, making it challenging to use their powerful dashes effectively. Funky Big Head has strong defensive stats, high jumps, and low gravity, giving it the best airtime in the game and solid trade power against most classes. Burning Beast has probably the strangest movement in the game, with a very high base jump and a single downward stealth dash. This enables mix-ups on the air dash timing, as well as quick, safe approaches by mashing A. Wild Soldier is a very bulky class, second only to Metal Grappler in defense and down. It has 2 quick downward dashes, which are quite strong, but Wild Soldier's movement outside of these dashes is quite limited. Sassy Stunner, like Trick Flyer, has incredibly versatile aerial movement with a high base jump and 4 quick air dashes. A high number of dashes are useful for precise movement and baiting punishes. Little Dasher is quite similar to Little Raider, with slightly lower ground mobility, slightly higher defense, and a single air dash instead of 3 continuous jumps. Soaring Jetter is the second skydashing class, featuring a high jump and a shorter but more maneuverable skydash than Lightning Sky. Each class's defensive capabilities are based on their down and damage taken. Movement is broken down into ground and air movement, dependent respectively on ground speed, acceleration, and turning, and several jump and air dash properties. The stat displays in-game are easy to look at, but severely lacking in detail. We have exact numbers for all relevant stats and have linked some resources in the description for reference. The class you pick greatly influences what playstyles are available to you, but all classes are quite versatile. Each Robo also has a unique charge, and each charge can be useful in different situations. For example, charges can be combo enders, anti-air options, reversal tools, defensive options, or tricky and good at catching opponents off guard. Guns are the most varied part type with various ranges, damage, speed, homing, combo potential, and area denial. The massive variety in how guns work means they can serve multiple functions within a build, but most often they're your main damage source and rely on bomb and pod setups to land consistently. The can't possibly do justice to guns as a whole without taking a lot of time, so honestly, just pick guns you think look cool and experiment to see how they work and where their strengths and weaknesses lie. As I mentioned earlier, bombs and pods are strong neutral tools. This is because they have virtually no end lag, so you can spam them pretty safely as long as you don't stand still for too long. Keep in mind that bombs will halt your momentum when fired, pods do not. Bombs vary in speed, height, and number of bombs fired. Pods primarily differ in speed and homing. All pods have up to 3 projectiles, with some pods firing all at once, and others firing one at a time. Bombs and pods are also characterized by their blast type. Blast types are indicated by the letter at the end of the bomb or pod's name and inform the size, shape, damage, down, knockback, and hit stun of the blast, as well as the visual appearance. Here's a list of the different blast types and how they function. One interesting feature of custom Robo is that guns, bombs, and pods can function differently depending on if they're fired from the ground or in the air. Some parts are basically the exact same. Some fire different numbers of projectiles. Some fire projectiles in different directions. Some fire at different speeds. Some have different knockback. And some work completely differently. It's important to know how your part's ground and air shots differ so you're aware of your options and can use your parts more effectively. Legs impact your Robo's movement stats. Usually, a Robo can function well with one of several legs, and the choice comes down to what kind of movement you want to emphasize. For example, aerial beauties gain hugely powerful lateral air movement when using wide jump. This enables poking and playing footsies and is strong with neutral focus builds. But they can instead gain massive height using long thrust. This makes it harder for the opponent to interact with you and is strong with long range builds. There are no hard and fast rules about leg picks, so test out different options and see what fits your playstyle best. There's lots more to explore with each individual part, but that's best left for a different day. I know I said it a lot, but experiment with parts you like to see how they can fit together and take inspiration from the part combinations more experienced players use. For now, let's move on to some more advanced mechanics. First, the slide shot. Slide shot is performed by firing your gun while running on the ground. Naturally, you'll slide faster if you're moving faster, but slide shot distance is also impacted by your gun's slide shot duration. Slide shots are essentially part of gun end lag, so some low end lag guns have virtually no slide shot. Conversely, guns that fire many projectiles have long slide shots without having significantly more end lag. While most applicable for grounded classes like Little Raider and Shining Fighter, slide shots are useful for all classes to enable firing gun while moving into or between cover. Next, acro cancelling. Acro cancelling is performed with the special Acrobat bomb. Acrobat is different from other bombs in that it has no damage, minimal down and hit stun, and fires at the user's feet with high upwards knockback. On its face, this makes it useful for quickly gaining height, but acro cancelling greatly increases the utility of Acrobat. Acro cancelling is performed by firing Acrobat, then shortly after firing gun and landing on the Acrobat explosion. Acrobat cancels the gun's end lag and knocks the user upwards, allowing you to move sooner than usual after firing guns with high end lag. The gun still takes the same amount of time to reload, so you can move freely when you normally have end lag, but you can't use acro cancels to spam guns. Acro cancelling is powerful, but the reliance on Acrobat has two main drawbacks. First, not having an offensive bomb hinders neutral pressure. Usually, the ability to fire powerful guns without having to deal with end lag can make up for this, but you're still essentially fighting down one offensive option. Second, acro cancelling inflicts some down on the user. If used carefully, this isn't a massive limitation, but the down is significant enough that acro cancelling is effectively off limits for a few classes. The next mechanics are related to how Robos acts when firing pods in the air. When firing anything mid-air, your Robo's leg thrusters activate and your descent is slowed. Your momentum is halted while firing guns and bombs, which doesn't provide much utility, but your momentum is maintained while firing pods. If you fire a pod while falling, you can greatly increase your airtime and horizontal distance. This is called pod floating. With some classes, you can fire a pod directly after a dash to carry the momentum from the dash and increase the distance covered. This is called pod gliding. These techniques can be performed with any pod, but they benefit from highly spammable pods like Trio. It should be noted that firing pods only maintains horizontal momentum, and upwards momentum is cancelled. Jumping, then firing a pod to cancel the jump is called rise canceling. It's not the most widely applicable technique, but the extra control is situationally useful. For example, against certain anti-air parts, rise canceling can be useful to enable safer aerial movement while simultaneously applying some offensive pressure. There are a few other, less common mechanics that I'm not covering here. It's not crucial to know the intricate details of these mechanics or even the ones I did talk about, but it's useful to be aware of the options available to both you and your opponent. Now, let's finally dig into the main competitive game mode, Tag Battle. The parts in Custom Robo have pretty polarized strengths and weaknesses, so competitive play is almost always in Tag Battle since it softens counterpicks and allows more flexibility in playstyle. Our competitive rule set specifically says that matches are played in P1 plus P1 versus P2 plus P2 tag mode. This just means that each player controls 2 Robos, one at a time, and can tag between the 2 during a match. Matches are also played with a 180-second timer and with self-bomb and pod damage on, but these settings are default so you should never have to worry about them. The last main rule is that each player can have a maximum of 1400 health across their 2 Robos. This is to make timeouts less common, since the max timer option of 180 seconds is a little short. Players basically always use a 700-700 health split, but any configuration is allowed as long as it's not more than 1400 total health. On the topic of rules, our stage picking rules are a little lax and our stage list is in flux as we figure out how to make more and more stages less cancerous to play on. Generally, all stages above the random stage option are legal and people will gentlemen's to a specific stage, usually basic arena, for the first game in a set. As I said, each player controls 2 Robos in Tag Battle. This means you need to select 2 builds before readying up. Very rarely, someone will play with 2 of the same build, but to prevent hard counterpicks, I recommend that you have at least 2 builds that function somewhat differently to cover bad matchups. Once in battle, press Y to tag between your Robos. After tagging, there's a 7-second cooldown before you can tag again, indicated by the change text below your Robo's health bar. If a Robo falls below 150 health, it will regenerate back up to 150 while tagged out. Note that unlike some tag fighters, you only need to deplete one Robo's health in order to win, not both. Tagging also introduces a few unique mechanics which are core to competitive Custom Robo. First is Tag Birth. Recall that after exiting down normally, a Robo enters Rebirth. If you instead tag while down, your Robos will swap and the now active Robo will instantly enter Rebirth. Tag Birth is incredibly important for denying damage from your opponent, since it allows you to exit down where normally your opponent would have an uncontested opportunity to wail on you. Additionally, the fact that it instantly grants Rebirth allows for powerful reversals if your opponent overcommits while you have Tag Birth available. However, as with normal Rebirth, Tag Birth is easily punished if you overeagerly charge or fire your gun. Even if you don't get a free punish from your Tag Birth, just denying damage is often reason enough to use it. Next is down canceling. After tagging, there's a short window where the Robo tagging out is vulnerable. If hit during this window, the tag is cancelled and your Robo takes damage as normal. If this happens while downed, then your Robo stands up with full down, minus whatever hit canceled the tag. This is called the down cancel. Parts that can produce lots of hitboxes like Flame and Blade are particularly prone to causing down cancels. Since Tag Birth is performed by tagging while down canceling happens often when attempting to leave disadvantage state by Tag Birthing. Being down cancelled is usually pretty bad, as you're often in hit stun from taking an attack and left open to follow-up attacks. On top of this, if you try to mash tag, then you risk getting repeatedly down cancelled and giving up a massive amount of health for free. However, in some situations, for example against laggy guns, intentionally down cancelling can grant a punish opportunity that would be otherwise impossible since you're knocked down. This is a risky and difficult strategy, but can pay off if executed well. Above every other mechanic I've mentioned, Tag Birth and down cancelling are by far the most important to understand for competitive Custom Robo. The final tag mechanic is the parry. I said earlier there's a short window during which your tag can be cancelled. For 1 frame before that, the frame right after a tag is initiated, your Robo is invulnerable and will take no damage if hit. I don't think anyone ever tries to parry intentionally since the window is so tight, and if you mess up you just eat damage that you probably could have easily dodged. Instead, parries almost always happen when someone is expecting to get knocked down and preemptively mashes Y to try and Tag Birth. Of all the information presented in this guide, I think the tag section is the most important since it contains mechanics that are both common and not obvious, so I encourage you to rewatch this section and ask questions if you don't understand something. With that said, let's move on to the final main section, part picking and battle strategy. Custom Robo is not a very technically demanding game. The peak of execution is pressing A quickly and holding your stick kinda precisely. Instead, skill is mostly expressed through part knowledge and playstyle. There's an enormous number of possible part combinations, so the task of picking a set of 5 that work well together can be intimidating at first. There are certainly bad builds, but there's no single right way to make a good build. In my opinion, the biggest barrier to having a good build is just lack of familiarity with parts. Ideally, you should know every part in the game intimately, but a more realistic goal is having 3 or 4 unique builds whose parts you understand well. A good way to build up your knowledge is just experimenting with parts. While in Part Select, you can hold Y to read the descriptions for each part. You can also enter practice mode by going to the arcade mode part select and pressing R, which is useful for quickly testing parts and practicing combos. As you build up knowledge, you can pick a couple of parts you like using and build up other parts to support that core. Experienced players have posted many strong builds in the Custom Robo Discord server, so check those out and see what part combinations crop up repeatedly. You can also watch tournament matches to see how those parts work together in practice and get an understanding of what build archetypes work well. But the most important thing is to just try stuff out to figure out what you like and how different parts fit together. Another thing to consider is matchups and counterpicks. While Tag Battle softens counterpicks, it doesn't remove them entirely. As such, understanding the weaknesses of both your builds and your opponent's builds is important for covering your bad matchups and exploiting your opponents. For example, what range does your opponent's gun work best at? Does the Robo have landing lag that you can punish? Are they rushing you down a lot? If so, what parts can you pick to stuff their approach? These are the kinds of things you can think about when considering matchups, and understanding how to swing matchups in your favor through both part picks and playstyle adjustments will give you an edge. However, just having good builds is not enough. You need to play intelligently to get wins. Playstyle varies a lot between players and based on your build, especially your Robo and gun, but there's some good general principles to operate under. First off, fire your gun less. This is the biggest mistake I see new players make, especially people whose only experience with Custom Robo is playing the story mode as a kid. This works great for the lobotomy patients in story mode, but competent human players will easily strafe around gun spam and punish your end lag. Of course, guns are powerful and useful, so you shouldn't just never fire them, but you have to be mindful of how and when you fire. A good strategy for many builds is to fire bomb and pod in neutral, occasionally tossing out gun if you're safe, and following up on bomb and pod hits with gun. The efficacy of this strategy depends greatly on your exact build, but for most combinations of parts this works well. Hand in hand with this is using cover effectively. Bombs and pods with large blasts can go through thin walls, but very few guns can go around cover. If you fire your gun so that you fall or slide behind cover, you'll be far better off than just wildly firing out in the open. Similarly, you should try to avoid landing outside of cover. Each Robo has a base landing lag, and that landing lag is increased by air dashing. If you land in the open after an air dash, it opens you up to an easy punish. As with everything in this game, this is build dependent, so you don't need to be as scared of a landing lag punish if your opponent is using something like Bubble or Claw. I said earlier that playstyle varies a lot, which is accurate, but there are some common archetypes which I'd like to go over briefly, those being mid-range, rushdown, and runaway. These archetypes generally correlate with a gun's effective range, but not always. Firstly, mid-range. Mid-range relies heavily on good bomb and pod usage, often using pods to flank the opponent and bomb to deny space in front of you. This traps the opponent, forcing them to either eat a blast or use a potentially laggy defensive option, opening them up for a punish either way. Mid-range benefits well from highly active parts with strong combo potential like Crescent P, Straight G, and Trio H, used in combination with pokey guns like Needle or punish guns like Sniper. Next, Rushdown. Rushdown thrives on preventing the opponent from acting, either by using a high-speed build that doesn't give much opportunity to react, or simply by staying in close range and stuffing the opponent's movement if they try to move away. Typically, Rushdown builds will use parts with high combo potential like Splash, Standard S, or Caboose T in combination with a high damage charge or gun. Rushdown can be very swingy, either rapidly dealing high damage or face-tanking anti-Rushdown parts and falling over. Lastly, Runaway. Runaway is reliant on long-range guns that can output reliable damage at a high rate. These parts are usually not great at close range. Guns like Rayfall and Swordstorm have setup time before firing, and Glider's air shot doesn't hit opponents close range. As such, the strategy is to keep lots of distance from the opponent, supporting this with bombs and pods like Delta, Satellite, or Spider that shut down space to limit approach options or shake off opponents in close range. This is a pretty simplified overview of parts and strategy. As you play more, you'll get a better feel for how you want to construct your builds and what playstyles work best for you. This guide is pretty information dense, but the things I covered are important for competitive custom Robo, so definitely rewatch sections of this video as needed. Now that you're armed to the teeth with knowledge, you should start actually practicing. The best place to play against other people is the Custom Robo community's Discord, and I put a link for that in the description. We're always happy to help newcomers and chat about Custom Robo, so feel free to join if you have any questions. I also recommend you check out the Custom Robo Videos YouTube channel. This is where all our tournaments are streamed and posted, and other CR related content might occasionally pop up there. I've put a link to this in the description as well. There are some older VODs on my channel which you can consider checking out. Finally, I've linked the guide for setting up our current competitive patch and several text and video guides covering various Custom Robo topics. I hope this guide has been helpful for you. Thanks for watching.